He didn't know her name. She never asked for help. But on a wind-bitten afternoon, when the world seemed to sigh under the weight of another turning season, a struggling single father named Cal Weston discovered a starving pregnant stranger sleeping in the corner of his weathered barn. She was curled in on herself, shivering beneath a threadbare coat, her arms protectively wrapped around her swollen belly as if shielding the child within from a world that had long since turned its back on her. She hadn't come looking for rescue, but kindness, quiet and unassuming, has a way of stirring miracles, especially when no one's expecting them. If you've ever believed in second chances, in love that finds you when you've stopped searching, in the unspoken beauty of goodness, done not for reward but because it's right, then stay close, because this story might just settle in your soul and remind you of what still matters. And if tales like these speak to the corners of your heart, still hope, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more. Now let's begin. The wind had changed. Cal Weston felt it the instant he stepped onto the sagging wooden porch of his old farmhouse, nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. Autumn didn't just arrive here, it announced itself. With crisp, sharp edges in the air, with the scent of earth and endings, with golden leaves spinning like coins tossed by fate, settling across the gravel path that led to the barn at the edge of the property. The maple trees let go of their leaves like they were shedding memories, and the silence that followed was not empty, it was thick with meaning. Cal, who had long since stopped listening to the echoes of memory, adjusted the worn strap of the tool bag across his shoulder and headed for the barn to fix the warped door. Ginger, his orange tabby, was nowhere in sight, likely hiding from the storm under the porch, wrapped in a clay pot like she often did. The barn stood like an old man with a crooked spine, slouched but still standing. Its wooden boards groaned in protest as Cal approached. He pushed the door open and stopped cold. There, nestled between two hay bales, was a woman, or what looked like one at first. She was small, too still. Her coat, thin and torn, clung to her frame, and her boots were crusted in dry mud. She didn't move. For one chilling moment he thought she might be dead. But then she stirred, just barely. "Hey," he said, voice soft as he crouched beside her. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. Beneath them, eyes the colour of stormy skies, blue-grey, rimmed with red from exhaustion, blinked open. She tried to sit up, but her strength had long since left her. "It's okay," Cal whispered, hands held out in front of him, careful not to startle her. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Cal. This is my property." She looked around, dazed, as if only now registering where she was. I'm sorry," she rasped. "I didn't mean to trespass. I couldn't walk anymore." "You're pregnant," he said, not as a question, but as a truth already written in the way she held herself. She nodded, face tightening in pain. 7 months. Cal hesitated. His life, carefully built, quietly guarded, wasn't made for intrusions, but this woman wasn't an intrusion. She was real. She was cold. And something inside him, something buried beneath layers of loneliness, stirred. "Come on," he said, rising. "Let's get you inside." "I can't pay you," she murmured. "I didn't ask," Cal replied. Inside, his daughter Maisie sat on the floor, surrounded by picture books. She looked up as Cal helped the woman into the house, curious, not frightened, quiet as she'd been since her mother's death. "This is—" Cal paused. "What's your name?" "Evie," the woman whispered. "This is Evie. She's going to stay the night. She's not feeling well." Maisie nodded solemnly and, without hesitation, walked to the couch and handed Evie her favourite blanket, the one with faded stars and frayed edges. Evie's eyes filled. "Thank you," she said, voice barely above a breath. Cal fetched a cup of warm cider and turned on the old heater. As Evie curled into the couch, her eyes drifted closed. Her shoulders, tight with fear and fatigue, began to ease. "Do you have anyone we can call?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No, it's just me." He didn't press. He didn't need to. That night, long after Maisie had fallen asleep and the house had quieted to the hum of the old heater and the ticking of the kitchen clock, Cal stood by the window, staring at the silhouette of the barn. He remembered how Evie's hands had trembled, how she whispered something, soft and private, into the quiet as she clutched her belly. He didn't believe in signs. Not anymore. But something about today refused to fade. Behind him, Evie stirred in her sleep. Ginger had crept beside her, curled at her feet. And in that stillness, Cal felt something shift inside him. Not grief, not fear, something gentler, something beginning. By dawn, the world had changed again. The kind of quiet that blanketed everything like wool had returned. Cal rose with the sun, like always, and padded to the living room. He froze. Evie was awake. She sat cross-legged on the couch, belly rising beneath a knit throw. The golden light of a table lamp cast soft shadows on her tired face. In her hands was a mug, not the usual chipped one, but a sunflower-painted cup that had once belonged to his late wife. That mug hadn't been touched since the funeral. "I hope it's okay," Evie said, noticing his stare. "I couldn't sleep. It was the only clean one I could reach." Cal nodded, something inside him cracking, not in pain, but like ice thawing. "It's fine." Moments later, Maisie appeared, dragging her blanket. She stared at Evie, curious and quiet. "Morning, sweet girl," Evie said gently. Maisie didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked forward and handed Evie her stuffed rabbit, the one with nearly threadbare ears. Evie blinked. "Thank you, Maisie. That's very kind." Cal was stunned. Maisie never offered that rabbit to anyone. "Pancakes?" he asked her, trying to ground himself. Maisie nodded. "I can help," Evie offered. "I make a mean apple cinnamon flapjack, or I used to." "Just don't lift anything heavy," Cal said, surprising even himself. Later, the scent of apples and vanilla danced through the house. Maisie stirred batter. Evie peeled apples with a quiet grace. "It's been a while since I cooked," she said. "Feels good, like remembering who I used to be." "When I had someone to cook for," she added softly. Maisie giggled at a batter splatter. Evie laughed with her, a light, melodic sound that stayed with Cal even as he stepped outside to clear his head. When he found her near the barn later, arms around her back, hair teased by the wind, she looked like a photo, paused in time. "You shouldn't be on your feet. I needed the sky, the sun. It's been a long few days. You came far." She nodded. "Walked part. Rode part. The last ride left me at a feed store on Route 9. I just kept walking." "You're strong. I used to be softer," she said. "Losing someone changes everything." "Yeah," Cal said. "It does." That night, after Maisie fell asleep and Ginger resumed her place by the hearth, Evie sat by the fire. "I've taken too much," she said suddenly. "I'll leave in the morning." "You're staying," Cal said simply. "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because someone should have done the same for me, and didn't." They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. The fire whispered, the leaves rustled, and something wordless settled between them. Not love. Not yet. But something softer, something steady, something like healing. And for the first time in years, Cal Weston didn't feel haunted by silence. He felt whole. The branch was weathered, its bark worn and splintered by time, but it held firm, a silent witness to all that had passed beneath its reach. It reminded Cal of himself, scarred but not broken. He hadn't shared much of his past with Evie, not because he didn't trust her, but because the words were still too heavy, not yet ready to leave the quiet corners of his mind. She never pressed him. She didn't need to. And somehow that made it easier to breathe. Yet her presence had a way of stirring memories he had long buried. It wasn't anything grand, just the small things. The way she folded dish towels in that exact, precise manner Lorna used to, or the soft hum she let drift into the air while washing dishes. It didn't hurt. Not exactly. It was gentler than pain, but maybe that made it even harder. It reached places inside him that he thought had long gone numb. That particular afternoon, Cal stepped into the living room and paused. Evie was sitting on the floor, one hand propped behind her for support, the other showing Maisie how to fold paper cranes. Around them were scraps of paper, imperfect shapes, and a growing flock of slightly off-kilter birds. Maisie's laughter echoed through the room, full and bright, the kind of laughter that had been missing for nearly 2 years. He hadn't realized just how long it had been since he'd heard it like that, unguarded and real. Maisie looked up with sparkling eyes. "Dad, look, I made one with only one wing." Evie grinned at her. "She says it flies in circles." Cal laughed, a short, surprised sound that caught even him off guard. He found himself sinking onto the edge of the couch, unable to look away from the gentle scene in front of him. Evie helped Maisie reshape a crane with quiet patience. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just there, present, good with children, not in a studied, performative way, but in a way that felt earned, lived. She carried something behind her eyes, something that spoke of joy remembered and sorrow endured. And as Cal watched her, he found himself wondering again what loss had carved itself into her life. That evening, after Maisie had fallen asleep upstairs, Cal poured 2 mugs of tea instead of 1. He handed one to Evie as they settled near the fireplace, the flames casting flickers of gold across their faces. "I haven't seen her like that since." He trailed off. The sentence didn't need finishing. Evie cradled the mug between her hands, eyes reflecting the fire. "She's a lovely girl, quiet like you, but there's a softness in her that hasn't hardened yet. That's rare." Cal stared into the flames. "She stopped speaking to strangers after the funeral, wouldn't talk at school either. I had to pull her out. We do homeschool now, it's not perfect, but it's what we've got." Evie nodded, her voice low. "That's more than a lot of kids have." Silence stretched between them, not heavy but thoughtful. Cal found himself wanting to ask her things, about her past, her pain, who she had once held close. But something held him back. He didn't want to press, didn't want to touch something still healing. Evie spared him the effort. "I had a daughter once," she said, her voice nearly a whisper. "Her name was Ruby. She lived for just 3 months." Cal turned slowly, heart thudding. "She was born early, trouble breathing, the doctors tried everything." Evie's voice trembled like old glass. "We spent weeks in the NICU. I didn't sleep, just sat beside her crib and hoped. My husband, he couldn't handle it. He left. And when Ruby passed, I guess I left too. Not in body, but everything inside me just shut down." Cal said nothing, but something deep within him twisted. Her pain was quiet, but it echoed loudly. "This baby wasn't planned," Evie continued, hand resting on her belly. "I was careful. Life, I guess, has its own plans. When I found out, I was terrified. Still am, but I want to believe this one. This one's different." Cal's voice was rough with something unspoken. "Maybe this one's a second chance." Evie smiled faintly. "Maybe." The fire crackled between them, and outside the wind carried leaves across the land. Whether as a benediction or a warning, neither of them could say. But inside the house, the silence had changed. It no longer spoke of grief. It was filled with understanding. Unspoken, but deeply felt. And Cal Weston, who had long believed his heart had sealed itself shut, felt something stir. Something that might, just maybe, be hope. By the end of the week, the air had changed again. Chimney smoke curled through the hollows of the land, and the trees now stood bare against a pale wintry sky. Cal felt it not just in the weather, but in the house. It was warmer, not in degrees, but in spirit. Evie moved slower now. Her sweater stretched over the swell of her stomach, and she often paused mid-task to catch her breath. But she kept moving, folding laundry, peeling apples, sweeping the porch. She said it made her feel useful, and Cal didn't argue. He knew too well the need to stay in motion, to stay one step ahead of memory. Maisie, meanwhile, had grown quietly attached. Each morning, she'd join Evie in the kitchen without a word, and they'd colour, cook, or simply sit together in peaceful silence. 2 old souls who didn't need words to understand one another. One Saturday, Evie asked to walk the trail behind the house. "It clears my head," she said. "It's cold," Cal replied. "I'll bundle up." She was already wrapping her scarf tight. "I want to see the last leaves before they fall." He let her go, but 10 minutes later he followed, at a respectful distance. The path twisted through a shallow glen lined by old stone fences and trees that seemed to murmur old secrets. Evie moved slowly, her hand often bracing her back. Cal stayed far behind, but close enough, just in case. She stopped beneath a tall sugar maple. Its last golden leaves fluttered like tiny suns. Evie reached up and plucked one loose, holding it like something fragile and sacred. She traced the veins of the leaf with her fingers, eyes filled with quiet thoughts. Then she slipped it into her coat pocket. Cal looked away. It felt like he had just watched someone pray. Later, she placed the leaf on the windowsill. A reminder, she told Maisie, that even when something falls, it can still be beautiful. Maisie nodded solemnly and began drawing a careful picture of the leaf. She handed it to Evie, who studied it with a soft expression, then folded it and tucked it into her pocket alongside the real one. "I'll keep them both," she whispered. Cal, standing in the doorway, felt something loosen in his chest. That afternoon, they made apple butter. The kitchen filled with the sweet steam of apples, cinnamon, and clove. Maisie giggled as she mashed the softened fruit, cheeks flushed with joy. Evie stirred the pot gently, humming under her breath. Cal recognized the tune. Shenandoah. Lorna had loved that song. She used to sing it while brushing Maisie's hair. His hands tightened around the counter's edge. Evie must have felt the shift. She turned gently. "You okay?" He nodded, throat tight. "Just something in my eye." She didn't press. Instead, she handed him a spoon. "Want a stir?" And just like that, the moment didn't vanish, but it softened. That evening, with Maisie in bed, Evie stood by the window holding a mug of chamomile. The golden light of dusk traced her silhouette. Cal joined her, his own tea cooling in his hands. "Do you ever feel," she said slowly, "like life took a turn and you're not sure where it's leading?" He didn't answer at once. That feeling was far too familiar. "Every day," he said. Evie looked at him. "Does it get better?" He saw the question trembling in her, like she didn't believe an answer existed. "No," he said softly, "not better, but it gets different, and sometimes that's enough." She smiled. "Different," she echoed. "I think I could live with that." Then she said something he didn't expect. "I think I'm going to name her Hope." His breath caught. "Not because I think everything will be perfect," she added, "but because I want her to know she came from something broken and still brought light." Cal stared into his cup, the steam curling upward like a silent promise. "Hope," he repeated. "That's a good name." That night, after the others had gone to bed, Cal sat at the kitchen table. He pulled out an old notebook, untouched for years, and began to write. Not a letter, not a journal, just thoughts. Things that fall can still be beautiful. Things that break can still hold. Hope is born in quiet places. He didn't know where the words were going. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was writing them alone. Evie sat with her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, the fire between them casting soft, flickering shadows on the walls. Its quiet crackle filled the silence, comforting and steady. She looked into the flames for a long moment before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was married once," she said. Her words hung in the air, delicate as glass. "We were young, so sure we had forever. But grief." She paused, her eyes distant. "Grief changes people. Some break, others bend. My husband, he broke, and I kept bending, until one day I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back." Cal turned to her then, not with pity, but with a deep, quiet reverence. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Evie gave a small shrug, as if brushing off the weight of sympathy. "I don't want pity," she murmured. "I want truth. I want peace. Maybe that's why I ended up here, where things are still enough to hear my own thoughts." She reached into her pocket and carefully pulled out the leaf she'd picked on the trail earlier. It was dry now, its edges curled and brown, but the shape remained intact. It was still beautiful, perhaps even more so because of the decay. She turned it in her fingers gently, then whispered, "This place, it's the most peace I've felt in years." They sat in a silence that was anything but empty, the storm outside howling, the wind clawing at the windows. Yet inside, the farmhouse felt still, safe, whole. Then Evie shifted slightly, a sharp breath escaping her lips. Cal sat up, alert. "You okay?" he asked quickly. She gave him a tight nod, grimacing. "Just a cramp, probably Braxton Hicks. They've been coming and going all day." Cal frowned. "You sure it's not?" "It's not time yet," Evie breathed, steadying herself. "Just practice." But Cal didn't like the sound of it. Not with the storm flooding roads and knocking out power. He stood up. "I'm going to set up the downstairs room for you, just in case. You shouldn't be climbing stairs tonight." Evie gave him a tired smile. "Thank you." As Cal gathered linens, his thoughts flickered between the sleeping girl in the blanket fort, the woman breathing through what might or might not be early labor, and the wind that hadn't yet finished its work outside. Something in him stirred, quiet but certain, like a voice whispering from deep inside, "Be ready." That night, sleep eluded Cal. He sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the rhythmic tick of the old clock on the wall. The storm had passed its worst, but still lingered, the trees outside groaning under the weight of wind and rain. Inside, however, it was calm, almost sacred. Then, just past midnight, a soft knock. He opened the door to find Evie standing there. Her face was pale, her hands clutching the doorway for support. "They're not practice anymore," she whispered. "It's happening." And in that moment, Cal Weston, who had survived ambushes in Afghanistan, dug trucks out of snowbanks, and stitched his own wounds under moonlight, felt a fear unlike any he had known. It wasn't dread, it was awe, awe of the woman trembling before him, awe of what was coming. He didn't hesitate. "Okay," he said, voice calm despite the storm inside him. "Come sit. We'll figure it out." The next hour blurred like a dream teetering on the edge of a nightmare. Evie bit down on a cloth to stifle her pain, her knuckles bone white. Cal flipped through a dusty, tattered emergency birth guide he'd found in the pantry. Why it was there, he had no idea. But in that moment, it felt like grace. He boiled water, laid out clean towels, turned the heat up. Evie, at first, refused to lie down. She paced, breathed, whispered to herself. Prayers or apologies, he couldn't tell. But through every contraction, every wave of pain, she never once asked him to leave. That stayed with him. When the contractions began to quicken, Cal knelt beside her. "Evie," he said gently, "I know I'm not a doctor, but I need you to trust me. Just listen to my voice." She looked down at him, her eyes blazing with fear and fierce maternal love. "You're doing fine, Cal," she said. "Just don't pass out on me." He grinned despite the tension. "Can't. I'm the only backup we've got." The birth that followed was raw, primal, and sacred. Evie cried out, her body shuddering, tears spilling from sheer exhaustion and pain. Cal held her hand through it all, anchoring her to this earth. Then at 2:17 a.m., a new cry joined the world. A baby girl, tiny, flushed and gasping her first breaths with lungs that sang her arrival. Cal, hands trembling, wrapped her in a soft flannel towel and handed her to Evie, who clutched her to her chest, sobbing. "You're here," Evie whispered through her tears. "You're safe. Hope. Welcome home." Cal stepped outside into the dawn's earliest light. Rain had become a drizzle. The sky began to stretch and yawn into morning. He leaned against the porch railing and exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for years. Behind him, inside the farmhouse, a newborn cried. Not just born into the world, but into a family. By morning, Maisie awoke to a house forever changed. She wandered into the living room in her pajamas, her stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand. "Daddy," she murmured. Cal knelt and brushed her hair back gently. "There's someone I want you to meet." Evie sat propped up on the couch, pale but glowing, cradling the baby in the same soft blanket Maisie had once been swaddled in. The little girl stepped forward slowly, eyes wide. "This is Hope," Evie said softly. Maisie looked up at her father, then at the tiny face nestled in the blanket. "She's little." "She is," Cal agreed, "but strong." "Can I be her big sister?" Maisie asked. Evie's breath hitched, her eyes brimming. Cal didn't need words. He pulled Maisie close and kissed the top of her head. That day they didn't run errands. No chores. No lists. Cal cooked a quiet breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and the last of the jam Evie had helped him make 2 weeks ago. He brewed a strong pot of tea and set out 3 plates for the first time in years. They ate together, talking softly, smiling, listening to the sounds of a new kind of stillness. "It's not much of a Thanksgiving," Cal said, glancing at the calendar. "No turkey, no pumpkin pie." Evie reached across and touched his wrist. "It's perfect." After the meal, while Hope slept, Maisie handed Cal a crayon drawing. A tree with yellow leaves, a cosy house with smoke curling from its chimney, and 3 stick figures holding hands. One tall, one round, one with pigtails. Below, in blocky letters, "My family." Cal stared at it, voice thick. "You forgot the cat." Maisie giggled. "She's in the window." Sure enough, a tiny orange blob sat in a square drawn above the house. Evie looked at him, smiling, and in her smile Cal saw something he hadn't dared hope for. Healing, warmth, the quiet miracle of a life rebuilt, not around what was lost, but what had been found. That evening, the power flickered back. The radio hummed low. Cal stood at the sink, washing dishes, listening to Evie hum a lullaby in the next room. He didn't know the tune, but he knew the feeling. It was home. The following week came soft and slow. The storm had moved on, but its echoes remained, in the puddles, the leaning fence post, the way Cal paused to hear the fire crackle or Hope breathe. Life inside the farmhouse took on a gentle rhythm, not rushed, not sad, just full. Evie spent her days in the rocking chair, Hope sleeping against her chest. Maisie curled at her feet with books and toys. Cal moved quietly, respectfully, almost reverently, as if aware that something sacred had settled in the house. He chopped wood, fixed what needed fixing, but also stopped often, just to look. At Evie. At Hope. At the crayon drawings taped to the fridge, something that had long been silent in him began to stir. One evening, with the sun melting behind the ridge, Cal lit a fire and brought in tea. Maisie had fallen asleep in Evie's lap, her thumb near her lip. Evie looked down at her, then up at Cal, her voice soft. "She loves you," she said. "That's not always a given, you know, but Maisie, she adores you." Cal sank into the chair, humbled. "I'm just doing what I can." "It's more than that," Evie said. "She watches you like she knows you've given pieces of yourself just to keep her whole." The words struck something deep in him, like kindling catching light. He didn't speak at first, just stared into the fire. "My wife used to say I loved through action," he murmured. "Fixing things, protecting people, being still, that was always harder." Evie gave a small, knowing smile. "You've been still with me." He looked at her, surprised. She simply nodded. "I noticed." Later, as Cal cleaned the kitchen and Evie stood by the window holding herself close, she spoke again. Her voice was fragile, like a memory brushing past. "I used to dream about a house like this. A porch, a maple tree, a kitchen where people talked instead of yelled." Cal dried his hands and leaned against the doorway. "I used to dream about being alone," he admitted. Evie turned, surprised. He shrugged. "After Lorna died, people kept checking in, bringing food, asking if I was okay, and I appreciated it, I really did. But every knock on the door—" "I think you're right," he said softly, his steps slow and deliberate as he walked toward her, the space between them shrinking with quiet intention. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice filled with concern that ran deeper than just the words. "I am," she replied, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she meant it. "I really am." Her hand moved almost shyly to her coat pocket, fingers closing around something fragile. She pulled out a small, carefully folded piece of paper, aged at the creases, worn at the edges. She offered it to him with a quiet reverence. It was one of Maisie's drawings. He hadn't seen this one before. A tall man, a small girl, a woman cradling a baby. A tree above them, golden leaves cascading gently from its limbs. She held it out, her voice soft. "I kept this," she said, eyes meeting his, "because I think maybe this is what healing looks like. Not flashy, not perfect, just slow and real." Cal took the drawing with a kind of sacred care, his fingers brushing hers, his eyes full of something unspoken. Then he looked at her, at baby Hope, at the house standing quietly behind them. The wind rustled through the bare branches of the old maple, and for the first time in a long while, Cal found himself listening and answering back. The days began to draw shorter, as they always did in late autumn. By 4 in the afternoon, long shadows stretched across the porch and the quiet farmhouse like whispers from the earth reminding them winter was near. Yet inside the house warmth had returned, not just from the fire that Cal tended with steady hands, but from something deeper, from life. Hope was 2 weeks old. She slept more often than not, cried rarely, and when she looked at you, it was as if she could see something you didn't even know was there. Especially Cal. Her gaze, so calm, so intense, made him feel exposed and cherished all at once. Her eyes held the shifting colours of a late October sky, pale, elusive, always seeking. Maisie insisted she'd inherited them from Cal. He'd laughed when she said it, gently shaking his head. "Not biologically possible, kiddo." But that night, under the soft golden glow of the nursery lamp, the one Evie and Maisie had set up together, he held Hope against his chest, looked into those watchful eyes, and felt something clench in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't blood that made a child yours. Maybe it was trust, the moment she sighed and drifted to sleep in your arms. Evie was healing too, though slower. Her body ached in places she didn't mention, but Cal noticed the winces when she got up from the rocker. Still, her cheeks had colour now. Her voice no longer trembled, and sometimes when she laughed, there was light in it again. One afternoon, Cal walked into the kitchen and stopped. She stood at the counter, rolling biscuit dough, flour on her sleeves, her hair tied back in a loose knot. Sunlight streamed through the window, lighting her hands just so. He stood still, caught by the moment, not in déjà vu, but in memory. Lorna used to stand there too, in that exact spot, kneading dough in morning light. But this time, memory didn't sting. It didn't weigh him down. It simply brushed past him like a breeze, gentle. She looked up and saw him watching. "What?" she asked with a smile. Nothing, he said, smiling softly. It's just good to see the kitchen alive again. She held his gaze longer than usual. Then, quietly, she said, I want to plant lavender in the spring, just outside the window. Cal blinked, surprised. Lorna loved lavender, he murmured. I know, Evie said, smiling faintly. Maisie told me. He nodded, the surprise settling into something softer. It'd be good to have it back. Something passed between them then, not spoken, but clearly felt. That evening, Cal sat alone in the barn, sanding the cradle he'd started making the day after Hope was born. His hands, though never trained in carpentry, moved with a kind of quiet purpose. The cradle wasn't perfect, but it was steady, real, like everything he was trying to build again. Maisie came in with a mug of cocoa. For you, she said, handing it over. Evie said not to let it go cold. He took it with a grateful smile. Thanks, Peanut. She looked at the unfinished cradle, then back at him. Are you going to give it to Hope? That's the plan, he replied with a warm grin. She hesitated, then asked, Did you make one for me? The question caught him off guard. He set the mug down gently. No, he said softly. I wasn't very handy back then. Your mom bought one second-hand from a neighbour, painted it yellow. You used to kick the side until the paint chipped. Maisie laughed. Sounds like me. Cal chuckled. She leaned gently against his knee. I think Hope's lucky, she said. She got you when you're better at being a dad. The words struck something deep in him. He pulled her into a hug. I wasn't perfect back then, he said quietly. I'm still not, but I'm trying. She nodded. You're doing good now. The next morning, Evie awoke to the smell of cinnamon and butter. She shuffled downstairs, robe loose, hair still a sleepy mess, and found Cal at the stove, wearing an apron that read, Grilled Sergeant. Maisie sat at the table, whipped cream on her nose. Morning, Evie said, laughing. Cal pointed at the plate. Pumpkin pancakes. Maisie's idea. Hope was gurgling in her bouncer nearby. Evie sat down as Maisie proudly poured syrup for her. Today's special, she announced. Why's that? Evie asked. Because it's Tuesday, Maisie replied, as if that were the best reason in the world. Evie burst out laughing. They ate together, sunlight pouring through the windows, and to Cal, it felt like a celebration. Later that day, with Maisie outside and Hope napping, Cal and Evie sat together on the porch swing. A breeze whispered through the trees. Evie held a mug of chamomile. Cal sat beside her, his arm resting along the back of the swing, close, not quite touching. Looking toward the horizon, Evie said quietly, I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't found your barn. Cal glanced over. You make it sound like it was luck. Wasn't it? He shook his head. No, it was something else, something I'd stopped believing in. Evie looked at him. And what was that? Grace, he said simply, slowly, steadily. She was silent for a while. Then, her voice barely above a whisper, she said, That makes two of us. She reached for his hand, not out of impulse, but something deeper. An invitation. And Cal Weston, a man who had spent years behind walls no one could see, let one fall. He laced his fingers through hers. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of chimney smoke and earth. Somewhere in the distance, Maisie laughed. Hope stirred, but didn't cry. Evie leaned her head against his shoulder, and the man who thought second chances were for other people sat in awe of how wrong he'd been. The first snow came early, gentle, tentative. It dusted the porch railings and settled on fallen leaves like lace. Cal stood by the window, watching it drift. That kind of quiet was more than stillness. It was invitation, to remember, to reflect. Evie entered, Hope tucked close to her chest. She's finally asleep, she whispered, smiling. That's a miracle, Cal said, grinning. She fought it for over an hour. Gets that from you. He held up his hands, mock-offended. Just an observation. The house was warm, pine-scented from the logs Cal had chopped. Outside, golden light spilled over the snow. Inside, everything felt suspended, timeless. And Cal felt it again, that voice in his heart he'd ignored too long. This isn't temporary. That night, after everyone was asleep, Cal climbed to the attic. Dust clung to every surface. He knelt by an old tin marked letters. Inside, he found it, a yellowed envelope with Lorna's unmistakable handwriting. He opened it, hands trembling. Cal, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I hate that. I hate that Maisie won't have me. I hate that you'll be left with too many things unsaid. So here's what I don't want to leave unsaid. Don't stop living. Don't turn our home into a museum. Let it be filled with laughter, pancakes, music, muddy boots, and someone new sitting at the table. You don't owe me grief, but you do owe Maisie your whole heart. If someone looks at her like she's magic, don't let them go. And if someone loves you the way you deserve, let them. Please, Cal, let them. Always, Lorna. He read it once, then again. By the fourth time he wept, not in anguish, but with something close to peace. These were tears of permission. The next morning, golden light bathed the snowy fields. Evie sat feeding Hope near the window. Maisie was drawing again, this time a snow-covered cabin, smoke rising from the chimney. Cal placed the letter in front of Evie. "What's this?" She asked softly. "Something I should have read a long time ago." She read it silently. Her eyes shimmered. When she looked at him, wonder mixed with something tender. "Why now?" He sat beside her, voice low. "Because I was afraid. Afraid letting go of what I had would mean losing her. But now, I see. Lorna didn't want to be a wall. She wanted to be a bridge." Evie covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Cal reached across, laid his palm on hers. "I don't know where this is going, but I know this house feels more like home with you in it." Maisie's drawing again. "Hope quiets when you hold her. And me, I look forward to the sunrise, just to hear your voice." There was silence. Then Evie said, voice steady, "I didn't come here looking for this. I know, but somewhere deep down, I think I was hoping." They both smiled. And in that moment, Cal Weston finally understood. Hope wasn't just a name. She was a person, a promise, a beginning. "Is this the place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, catching her breath. Cal looked down, the corners of his mouth curling into a soft smile. "You mean the ceremony?" She nodded gently. "It's where we found the first red leaf, the one Evie saved. I think that means something." He crouched beside her, brushing his hand over the grass. "Yeah, kiddo, that sounds just right." The ceremony wasn't grand, just the three of them, and Hope, of course. No crowd, no cameras, no decorations aside from the handful of fading lavender blossoms Maisie had picked herself, the last brave blooms coaxed into life by Evie in their tiny window box. Evie wore a simple cream dress, one that hugged her gently like a quiet memory. Over her shoulders, she wrapped an old shawl, one that had belonged to Cal's mother. Her hair was loosely braided over one shoulder and tucked close against her chest. Hope slept soundly in a sling, unaware, yet somehow knowing not to stir. It was as if even the baby sensed the weight and beauty of the moment. Cal, always simple and sincere, wore his cleanest flannel and the only tie he owned. His eyes, when he looked at her, held something that stole Evie's breath and tucked it away for safekeeping. There was no official officiant. They didn't need one. They stood beneath the bare limbs of the old maple tree, hands entwined, with Maisie between them. She stood tall and solemn, both hands outstretched like a little bridge connecting them. Cal cleared his throat, eyes fixed gently on Evie. "I didn't write vows," he admitted quietly, "but I have something true. I thought my life had ended. And then you appeared, walked into my barn with nothing but a suitcase and a baby growing inside you. You needed shelter. I needed saving. Turns out we gave each other both." Evie's eyes welled with tears. She inhaled deeply. "I was running," she confessed, "from the grief, from my past, from the shame of everything I'd failed at. I didn't come here to be loved, but somehow that's exactly what I found. In Maisie, in you, in this home that brought me back to life." A hush lingered between them, the wind brushing lightly against her shawl. Then Maisie cleared her throat and held up a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something too." They bent slightly to hear her better. She unfolded the paper with care and read in a small but steady voice. "I think a family isn't about who looks the same. It's about who looks out for each other. I think this is my family, and I think it's forever." Evie knelt and kissed the top of her head, whispering, "You made this day perfect." Maisie beamed. "I practiced it 10 times. There were no rings exchanged, just a promise, a quiet, reverent kiss beneath that tree as the final sighs of autumn drifted across the fields. Later, inside the farmhouse, they lit candles, played old vinyl records from Cal's dusty collection, and swayed in the living room to the melodies of the past. Maisie danced too, spinning until she collapsed in a heap of laughter on the rug. Evie watched as Cal cradled Hope in his arms, gently rocking her, as if she were spun from silk and dreams. "I've never seen you look so peaceful," she said softly. He adjusted the baby's head tenderly. "I think Peace is her middle name. Evie laughed through tears. Hope Peace Weston. Sounds like she should be strumming a banjo in a folk band. He chuckled. Give her 10 years, she'll be playing on the porch. Evie slid beside him, shoulder to shoulder, both of them watching their daughter, her tiny breath warm against Cal's shirt. She's calm like you, Evie whispered, but she dreams with her fists closed, like she's ready to fight for something. Cal nodded, his voice quiet. She already won. She made us a family. That night, once Maisie had gone to bed and Hope rested in the wooden cradle Cal had sanded just the day before, the couple sat by the fire, mugs in hand, flames dancing. There's nothing left unsaid, Cal murmured, staring into the hearth. But I have to admit, I was afraid that this might feel like I was replacing her. Evie looked at him gently. Lorna? She asked. He nodded. But it doesn't feel like that, he continued. You're not here instead of her. You're here because of her. She loved me so deeply, it helped me survive losing her. That made space for something new. Tears filled Evie's eyes. She reached for his hand. Then maybe one day, she said softly, I'll write her a letter, just to say thank you. Cal's throat tightened. I think she'd like that. They sat like that, hand in hand, for a long while. The fire crackled. A new life had begun, but it already felt full. Outside, stars glittered like promises. The wind stilled. And for the first time in many years, the house didn't just feel lived in. It felt alive. On the mantel, 4 stockings hung. Maisie, Evie, Hope. And one stitched from Cal's old flannel shirt, simply labelled Dad. On Christmas Eve morning, snow began to fall. Not in a storm, not even in flurries. Just a gentle, steady snowfall that softened the world in white. Behind the farmhouse, the fields were untouched, except for one trail of little footprints. Maisie's boots leading to the maple tree and back. She'd gone out early, bundled in scarves and mittens, to hang 3 pine-cone ornaments from the lowest branch. Evie stood at the window, cradling a now month-old Hope. The baby's cheeks had grown rounder, her eyes brighter, and her tiny fingers no longer clenched. They opened often now, as if reaching for something only she could see. Do you think she knows it's Christmas? Evie asked with a smile. Cal came up behind her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. She knows she's loved, he said, and that's enough. Maisie burst through the door, red-nosed and triumphant. I built a snow bunny, Cal laughed. What does it look like? Like a potato with ears, she said proudly. That afternoon, Cal chopped wood outside while Maisie and Evie baked gingerbread cookies inside. The scent of cloves and cinnamon filled the house, mixing with the warmth of the old record player playing Bing Crosby and Nat King Cole. Evie rolled dough slowly, still rebuilding her strength. She watched as Maisie carefully pressed cookie cutters into the dough, tongue poking out in concentration. You're a good big sister, Evie said. Maisie looked up. I want to teach Hope to draw. She'll love that, Evie smiled. Maisie hesitated. Maybe we can tell her about your first baby, about Ruby. Evie paused, breath catching. I just think, Maisie added, she should know she had a sister, even just for a little while. Evie cupped Maisie's face. That is the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me. Maisie beamed. Then I'll draw them, Hope and Ruby, under the maple tree. That would be beautiful, Evie whispered, blinking back tears. That night the house was quiet. Hope was finally asleep. The cookies cooled on the rack. Cal and Evie stood on the porch, snowflakes spinning in the light like slow-falling stars. Evie pulled her coat tighter. Do you ever pray? She asked. Cal exhaled slowly. I used to, before Lorna got sick. After that, I stopped, didn't see the point. Me too, Evie nodded. I stopped after Ruby, thought maybe no one was listening. They stood in stillness, their breath turning to mist. Funny thing, she said, I started again a few weeks ago. He looked at her. I don't ask for anything, she added. I just say thank you. For what? He asked. She turned to him, her voice tender. For this, for warmth, for Maisie's drawings, for your steady hands, for how you hold her like she's yours, for giving me back my name, Evie, not just a burden or a runaway. You saw me, and that saved me. His voice cracked. You saved me too. He pulled her close, their foreheads touched beneath the quiet hush of falling snow. I think, she whispered, Hope feels it too. Inside, by the fire, Cal sat with Hope sleeping on his chest and Maisie curled up beside him. Evie came in carrying 3 mugs of cider, 2 full, 1 barely a quarter. What's this one for? Cal asked. Evie smiled gently. For her. She placed the smallest mug on the mantel, beside a picture of Lorna, a vise of lavender and a folded letter Cal had written long ago. Maisie looked up. "Do you think Mom knows?" Cal nodded, eyes soft. "Yeah, kiddo, I think she does." They sat together, warm and whole in the way only those who have been broken can understand. No one asked for anything. No one needed to. And the next morning, as dawn turned the world gold beneath a blanket of snow, Cal stepped outside alone. He didn't bring a list. He didn't say a word aloud. He simply placed a hand over his heart, looked to the sky and whispered, "Thank you." No requests, no pleas, just a prayer of gratitude spoken in silence.